I'm Niall Paterson. Welcome to the Sky News Daily, or should that be welcome back, as we have already produced one podcast today. That was on Joe Biden's decision to step aside and instead support his Vice President, Kamala Harris, in her attempt to beat Donald Trump to the White House. So, if you want the story of how that all came about and why, just go back an episode. This time, we want to focus just a little more on Kamala Harris herself, her background, her record, and of course her chances of success. Later, we'll be digging into what the Harris 2024 campaign might look like with one political scientist. But let's get started with someone who knows her personally. Michael Yaki was senior advisor to the very senior Democrat Nancy Pelosi. Michael, you've known the putative Democratic candidate for president for, I think, more than 20 years. How would you describe it? In fact, before you tell me that, how did you get to know her in the first place?
It's so difficult for me, having grown up essentially with her in politics. I've always known her as Kamala, only when she became vice president, I have to start changing her name to Madam Vice President. But she's someone who I've known for 20 years. We grew up together in San Francisco politics. She was an activist. I was then the local chief of staff for Nancy Pelosi. I was elected to the Board of Supervisors, which is like the London City Council for San Francisco. And she was elected to the district attorney's office, and she's just gone from strength to strength ever since. So, I've known her pretty well. I've always admired the work that she's done. She's in a great position right now, but she's still got a lot of work to do. I mean, she has, I think, about 48 to 72 hours to prove that she can get the delegates committed to her before other people start popping up, and you already see people like Joe Manchin casually mention that he might re-register as a Democrat, and there are other names that are floating out there, and there are donors who are funding polls. But she's in the inside lane right now, and it's up to her to hold it.
You look at her career, you look at her CV, and, first female vice president, the highest-ranking female official in U.S. history, attorney general, senator for California.
Right.
I mean, these are all big, big jobs.
It is big. It is big, especially for a country state like California, which is like the sixth largest economy in the world. And it is. It's hard to govern, but she's managed to be very popular and do very well. And I think that experience is going to help her in the campaign, because it's not like you're in a small town and you're speaking to the same people over and over. You go 2 miles outside of Los Angeles and you're speaking to hardcore right-wing folks, the people who she's going to need to communicate to in order to keep the blue wall of the industrial states that she needs in order to win the presidency in November, assuming, of course, that she gets the nomination. And again, the next 72 hours are going to be critical to that.
Do you think that she will have had any qualms about the battle ahead, about the possibility of becoming president? Will this have been something that she will have had to give thought to? Or was it a complete, as we say in this country, a complete no-brainer?
When you think about it, it's always both. Because on the one, we're people who believe that we have the ability to do things. And so, yes, it's a no-brainer to take the next step up of responsibility. But if you don't go in it without some qualms, without some understanding of how difficult this is going to be, that your life is going to be X-rayed and MRI'd like you've never seen it before, that the kind of attacks that you have seen in the past are going to be magnified, no one would be you would be utterly foolish to not understand that's coming, because you need to be braced for that. My mentor, Nancy, used to say to me, you cannot throw a punch unless you expect to be punched back. Mm-hmm. And the difference between a good politician and a bad politician is understanding it and then being able to punch back harder.
Well, how would you describe Kamala Harris then as a performer?
Right. I would say that if there's one area that she's going to need some work on, and again, we haven't sort of seen her for the last 3 years because she's been buried in the vice presidential vault, right?
Indeed.
But she is a gifted orator. She is a prosecutor. She knows how to make the case. But in the Q&A, in the give and go between herself and journalists like yourselves, there can be some faltering, there can be some malpropisms, there can be some misstatement of fact. And I think she's going to have to really bone up on that. Not so much for the Trump debate, but more for everything else that comes after. And certainly, again, between now and the convention and between now and the time at which she thinks or she has the requisite number of delegates at hand so that on August 20th, when they do the roll call vote at the convention, she knows that she's going to be nominated. But, these are things that can be taught. It's something that I think you really need to work at.
Do you think that Kamala Harris will be up for a debate with Donald Trump? And if so, can she win against a man who debates in such a fashion? I mean, already people have mentioned the fact that it would be prosecutor versus felon, but a televised debate is not a courtroom.
That's too easy a reduction to say. What you're really talking about is someone who believes in truth against someone who doesn't care about it at all, in terms of what the debate says. And she's going to have to adapt her strategy accordingly. But I think that she's got to stick to a core message, and she has to think, assuming that she gets there, she's going to have to think about what the demographics are that she's going to need to get. She's going to need to reassure the sort of older white voter in Pennsylvania or Michigan or Wisconsin that she's not, a crazy left-wing Democrat. She's got to have a message, stick to it, almost not worry what Trump is saying. Just ignore what he's saying because he's going to be fact-checked to death by people like you and others in the media. She's got to communicate and not simply play fact checker the entire time. She can do it in a different way. She can do it with humor. She can do it with anger, but she has to do it. It's like the old saying: when you wrestle with a pig, you both get dirty, and you just got to be careful not to do that because Trump likes to get down and dirty.
I hate characterizing people in the manner in which I'm about to because it is more than a tad reductivist. But I am just wondering, in her political career up until now, and indeed in this presidential race against Donald Trump of all people, is the fact that she is a woman and indeed a woman of colour an asset to her or a negative?
I think it has to be an asset, and she has to think of it that way.
Yeah.
I mean, there's undoubtedly going to be some, and you just have to understand that it is a still unfortunate fact in parts of America where it will be a disadvantage. But there are far more voters out there for whom it can be an advantage if she knows how to turn it that way, and not worry about the fact that there are going to be some people who, no matter what, are going to say, "I'm not going to vote for that person because she's a woman, because she's South Asian, she's part black." I mean, all these things that you just know, unfortunately, are still part of the fabric of American society.
Okay, so what are the major challenges that she faces?
Her problem is going to be the fact that they're going to tag her with everything that they were tagging Biden with about the economy, about the border, all those things. And her difficulty is, how do you separate yourself or make the case without appearing to turn upon the person who gave you that opportunity in the first place? That's always the tightrope that a vice president, especially in this position, is going to have. And I would just encourage her, and I think that Joe Biden should encourage her, and I think that Obama should encourage her, and I'm sure Nancy Pelosi will encourage her to just be herself and be herself on these issues and understand that, she was vice president and accept responsibility for things that have happened in the past, but she is her own person, and this is what she needs to do going forward. And that message also is going to resonate with the delegates too. And again, we're all talking in speculation because she's got to nail down the delegates first and foremost.
Just in terms, though, of the campaign ahead, assuming, of course, that she gets through the convention and secures the nomination, I mean, with 100+ days to go, but as an individual, how do you rank her ability when it comes to political campaigns? I think back to that point when, she was trying to secure the Democratic nomination up against Joe Biden, cracking debate, had a bit of momentum, and then it all disappeared.
Yeah. One, I think a lot of it was her campaign apparatus. I don't think she had the best campaign. Now she has the Biden team. Her support staff is a lot different. It is one that's geared up for President Biden. They are transferring to her because the president told them to. I think that's going to be key, holding that intact. What you said is the one thing that is hovering in every Democrat's mind right now. And what Democratic donors are testing for in polling right now is Does she have that ability to take it to the next level, or are there other people out there who would have a much easier job in the next 106 days and counting to take the battle to Donald Trump? That's the one question mark that people have for candidates, no matter how good they are. If you do not have the right campaign team around you, nothing works.
Michael, thank you. And that is something we'll be exploring after the break, as we imagine what the Harris campaign might look like. Stay where you are. Welcome back. There is no time to waste for Kamala Harris. Months of campaigning have been lost, and she starts her run at the White House very much on the back foot. Yep, there will be an enthusiasm and an energy engendered by her introduction to the race as the potential Democratic nominee, but that can quickly dissipate in the frenzy that is a presidential election. Dr. Thomas Gift is Associate Professor in Political Science and Founding Director of the Centre on US Politics at UCL. Thomas, simple question. Can Kamala Harris win the White House?
I'm not convinced that Kamala Harris is significantly more electable than Joe Biden, even given all of the problems that Biden had in his campaign. There's been a lot of enthusiasm since Biden decided that he was going to exit, particularly among progressives and those who felt that he was just treading water against Trump at best. But Kamala Harris, we have to remember, hasn't been successful on a national stage. Also, during the last 3.5 years of the Biden administration, her approval numbers have been at least as bad as Joe Biden. So she's going to have to make a better second first impression, so to speak.
Coming from the end of the political spectrum that she does, centre-left, she will encounter the same sorts of problems that every Democrat has when they run into a populist in the shape of someone like Donald Trump.
Oh, 100%. And for better or for worse, she is tied to the policies and the record of the Biden administration over the last 3.5 years. She obviously wants to differentiate herself, but some of the weights around the neck of Biden are going to be weights around her neck, including 9-10% point inflation over the course of a couple of years, the cost of living crisis, immigration issues, of which she was charged with overseeing the root problems. All of these are things that she can try to distance herself from.
How would you imagine it will come to be characterized when the historians look back on 2024? What will typify Kamala Harris's approach to this election?
I think she wants this election to be entirely a referendum on Trump, and specifically entirely a referendum on his 4 years in office. So she's going to talk a lot about challenges to democratic institutions and norms under the Trump presidency. She's going to talk about Trump as a demagogue. She's going to remind Americans what it felt like to see January 6th unfold. She's going to tell Americans that impeachment 1.0, impeachment 2.0, all the scandals and mini scandals in between, those were no anomalies. They were the record of the Trump administration. And the question that she's going to ask is, do you want to go through that again?
Can she, so to speak, hit Donald Trump where it hurts, amongst white working class men, perhaps even beneath the age of 35, but maybe beneath the age of 45?
I think that's going to be a really tough task for her. I would say that Biden was almost uniquely suited to resonate with those voters. Of course, he talked a lot about his working class upbringing in Scranton, Pennsylvania, and his time in Delaware. He really could appeal to white working class voters in the Midwest whose jobs had been taken away through offshoring or automation or trade, where entire towns and industries have essentially been gutted by globalization. Harris is going to have a tough time appealing to those voters in Pennsylvania, Ohio, Michigan. Specifically, I think she's going to have to make up ground with the so-called double haters, that is, voters who dislike both Trump and Biden. She needs to convince them that I represent normalcy in Washington.
I wonder then, Thomas, what you think the role will be, if any, for Joe Biden through this campaign. I mean, I suspect that to an extent, Kamala Harris would be quite happy if she could keep him in a box and bring him out when necessary. But he is the president, and he is the president all the way, all the way through till she perhaps becomes president. Well, she or Donald Trump.
For Biden, one thing that's notable right now is he announced his decision to exit the race via a letter posted on X. He still hasn't made a public appearance. We all know that he's recovering from COVID, but still, this is the biggest announcement of his presidency, and we still haven't seen him live. I'm sure that he will give his full-throated endorsement of Harris. He already has in writing. But I'm not sure if Biden is someone that Harris wants on the campaign trail, simply because, again, he also is alienating to a large section of moderate voters. So it's going to be interesting to see how Kamala Harris uses the president.
And of course, it won't simply be Ms. Harris on the ticket. There will be a vice presidential choice. This, I suspect, will be one that they will have to think very, very carefully about, because it fulfills a number of functions, doesn't it? Of course, there is the direct head-to-head challenge between whoever Kamala Harris picks and J.D. Vance, but it also sends a very strong signal about the presidency that she would wish to have.
Absolutely. And it potentially tees up an heir apparent in 4 years from now. She's going to try to pair up with sort of a establishment candidate, someone who isn't perceived as being on the far left, someone who can complement her, and also probably from a state that has some electoral advantage. I think if you had to choose one individual at this point, my money would be on Joshua Shapiro, the governor of Pennsylvania. Full disclosure, I'm from Pennsylvania. However, his name is being floated quite a bit. He has approval ratings upwards of 55, 60 percentage points in the state, is widely seen as a rising star within the party. I think that he could balance out the ticket quite well.
What if someone like Kentucky Governor Andy Beshear? A lot of people have been mentioning his name. Popular two-term governor in what you have to describe as frankly, a deep red state, but he is quite young, and one wonders whether the political inexperience, or what Donald Trump will point to as political inexperience and just a lack of longevity on this planet, whether that might dissuade Kamala Harris.
It's very possible. I mean, Beshear does have quite a record of appealing to red America despite being a Democrat. And I think he's really threaded this needle where he's not constantly out there talking about social issues that are isolating for a significant fraction of Americans. But you're right, he hasn't served in office as long as some of the other potential candidates have.
What of Michigan and Governor Gretchen Whitmer? We're in the 21st century, but one wonders whether the Harris team would want to have two women on a ticket when it comes to a battle with someone like Donald Trump.
That's going to be a consideration. I mean, fair or unfair, I think that the Harris administration or campaign right now really does have to take that into account, and whether voters are ready, quote unquote, to support two women on the ticket. Mostly, I've seen Gretchen Whitmer discussed in the context of actually running for president. So I'm not sure if she's the natural successor, but identity politics here is playing a significant role.
Do you anticipate any big changes to the people that surround Kamala Harris? I mean, presidential candidates have massive teams, and there are some very important people at the top, Chief of Staff, Director of Communications, and so on. But there has been a lingering concern about the way in which Kamala Harris deals with her backroom staff. She's lost a Chief of Staff, a Deputy Chief of Staff, a Press Secretary, a Deputy Press Secretary, and many others over the years.
Harris's record with her staff, there have been a lot of reports of kind of a toxic political environment. There has been just a huge amount of turnover. I expect that she's going to take some of her staff that she has employed as vice president, and they'll transition into sort of the inner circle within the White House. My guess is that she'll probably retain some of the bigger names that have been serving in the administration for Biden. But absolutely, I mean, who's in your inner circle really matters a lot. If you think about Trump, he surrounded himself largely with yes men, especially after a huge number of members of his cabinet turned over initially and resigned. For Biden, his whole decision about staying in the race or not reportedly was affected to a large extent by those people who surrounded him. And so who Kamala Harris chooses to be on her West Wing staff is certainly going to be important in shaping the direction and trajectory of her campaign.
Thomas, thank you. A reminder that there is another episode of The Daily released earlier. That was covering Joe Biden's decision to exit the contest and the polling that perhaps forced his hand. You can find that wherever you got this one. But that is your lot for today. We'll see you again tomorrow.